Okay, confession time. I hate hosting. Not podcasts, actual in my house. People are coming over and I am in a full-blown panic. I'm freaking out about, are there vegetarians? Are there people with allergies? Did I get enough food? Is the house clean enough? Did I remember to get ice for the drinks? Spoiler, house is never clean enough. And no, I never remember to get enough ice. And yet, every single time, people do, of course, show up, and it's usually the absolute best people, and we have the best conversations, and we make the best memories, and we walk away with new fun facts that we've learned from each other and their various areas of expertise. And yes, this is a very spot on analogy for podcast hosting as well, because I inevitably am thinking, wow, why was I so worried about that? That was a great time. We all got a lot out of it. And the same can be true for podcast hosts. And I get it. You're wondering, if I build it, will they come? What if no one listens at all, ever? And what if no one cares what I have to share with the world? And more often than not, instead of just saying, F it, I've already gotten the hors d'oeuvres and the cute little plates, or in this case, the mic and the headphones, you just walk away and you don't do it. Or you make it into the early parts of the night and you decide, well, nobody showed up, so I'm taking down the cool twinkle lights, shutting the door, and pretending nobody's home. And yes, that is an analogy for the vast number of people who don't make it past episode 3 because they've been too focused on things like downloads that are maybe not the right metric to be looking at when you're deciding if your podcast is working. One of the biggest misconceptions about podcasting, especially for people like us, entrepreneurs, founders, people whose stock in trade is expertise, is that you need a massive audience in order for it to be considered successful, that you need some magical number of listeners before a podcast can start paying off. And that paying off means some unattainable, sort of frankly irrelevant number of downloads in the thousands or even hundreds in order to earn its keep. Yeah, if you're hoping to quit your day job and live off your podcast earnings, best of luck to you. It's going to take a little while. But for the rest of us who are using the podcast as a visibility tool or a different type of content marketing or to try something new, maybe all of those other metrics are not the point. What if I told you it's okay if your audience is the same size as maybe the invite list for my house party? That always causes me to panic. What if I told you that maybe the whole reason for the podcast might not be anything to do with those numbers? This episode's guest makes a very compelling case for that. Today, I am talking with Greg Wasserman, head of relationships at RSS.com, and someone who has built his entire career around one core idea, that life and business are built on time and relationships. I could not agree more. Here is a very different way to think about what a podcast can do, less about the finished product that you're listening to right now or watching, but rather about what happens inside the recording session and everything leading up to it. We talk about how to use a podcast to get access to people you wouldn't otherwise be able to reach, how to turn your guests into a network, and why the question of why isn't anyone listening might be the wrong question to ask. If you're sort of allergic to straightforward numbers-based data, or you just want a more strategic way to think about what a podcast can actually do for you, this one's for you. Hi, Greg.
What's up, Courtney?
So good to have you here. You're one of those people I met, and immediately I was like, oh, first of all, was so glad I had a podcast to invite you onto because you're just a brilliant conversationalist. But talk to me about opportunities and conversations, especially as pertains to podcasting.
Like you said, we met and I'm like, hold on, I don't know this lady. I have to meet this lady and hear all about her. And then my brain goes into like, who do I connect her with? Where could there be a path? And that's really just what I do. See superpowers. How do I take those relationships, stay in contact with people, and then connect the dots as the future goes on?
And your title is head of relationships. Now, be honest, did you make that title up? I love it.
So when I was at Cast Magic, the company before, we kept adding different titles. You're doing this, you're doing this. I'm like, you guys, I don't think A, that fits on a business card. B, that's too many characters. Like, what am I doing? And ultimately the founder's like, you're anything relationships. As long as it's the relationships, I'm like, great, head of relationships, done. Love the title. And it's just become the perfect thing, especially since I do believe life is about time and relationships. So it just became the ultimate title for me to go with.
It's interesting because I do something called LinkedIn Tuesdays. I know some people do LinkedIn every days, but this is my one accountability LinkedIn schedule that I have through a relationship community I'm part of called The Upside. Shout out to Erin Halper and the people that she connects there. But I just happened to write my post this week about sort of the hidden ROI of podcasting is the relationship part of it. And I say hidden, even though it may seem obvious to people like you specifically and me, but especially for new podcasters who this podcast is mainly for, is people who are podcast curious, don't know whether it's worth their time or energy. And they'll get down in the dumps, and new podcasters like, why would anybody want to be on my podcast? I don't have any downloads yet and blah, blah, blah. But it's also, first of all, people want to be on podcasts. That's a whole other thing. Second of all, the ROI is not always within what you put out into the world, but also what happens in this space and the connections that we make leading up to and following it. Can you say more about that? Because I think you agree with that.
I mean, that's my whole philosophy, right? So every podcaster has this whole mentality of how do I make money in podcasting? They think sponsorships and ads. And if you think about a creator from that standpoint, you're a business, but that business is that you're doing all these different functions. That is just one component. So if you think about a business who's running a podcast, that's not their skill set. B, that's a lot of work and energy. So I'm like, great. How do we make you money beyond just how do I grow my show so I become a media company? That's a completely different mindset. If you're thinking the ROI of your podcast is I need to grow this so that I can get 20,000 downloads and therefore I can make a couple $100 from a sponsorship, depending on the niche. I'm being very generic in the mindset here, but ultimately the ROI is really just relationships. So if I use my podcast from a relationship standpoint, good example, I've got a buddy who loves horror movies and he goes to horror events and I'm like, Brett, why don't you just start a podcast, bring in all the vendors to your show, and after maybe 10 episodes and 10 times bringing them on, you're not just the guy coming to their booth at these events. You're actually a hour-long conversation where they get to know you, you get to quiz them and extract information, get them to promote you. Like that's your ROI. Now all of a sudden you have this relationship with these people. They'll invite you to these events because like, oh my God, I love this dude and he invited me to these places. That is now the ROI, as opposed to like, I got to grow the show so that I can get a sponsor or one of these vendors to sponsor my show and I can make money. It's like, no, your ultimate end goal was just to be invited to these places and then that takes you places. So for me, I'm all about how do I use my podcast to build the ROI of relationships and then using those relationships, whether it's getting you a job, getting you invited to a event, or building these connections that turn into partnerships, turn into just knowledge share. And that is the true ROI. ROI of relationships is long-term. It's not transactional. And so if you think about everything being transactional and your transaction mindset around advertising, it's like, all right, I got to amass this audience so I can go sell this brand to my audience. It's transactional. So I'm trying to think about long-term.
So talk to me about how you would set someone up for success for a podcast whose maybe one of their primary metrics of success is how many relationships they've been able to develop, starting from absolute zero in terms of they're on episode 0. They're nervous about reaching out to someone. You obviously are the master of outreach. Like I get so much garbage in my LinkedIn inbox and you immediately, I was like, who is this guy? He's right. Life is about relationships. What have you learned about your skill of connecting to people, especially as concerns getting on podcasts or getting people on their podcasts? How do people do that?
I mean, I hate to use the authenticity term, but it's kind of that, right? If I've leaned into this life as a time in relationships, that's ultimately been my outreach. If I think about how I've done over the last, I don't know, number of years, significant number of years, my whole thing has always been, look, I'll send you a cold outreach and go, came across your profile. I kind of list my accolades going, this is what I've done. So therefore we should be able to connect on something. And then life is about time and relationships. I have no clue where one conversation is going to take us. If you're open to it, I'd love to talk. And I know historically, I haven't looked at the stats recently, but I know historically LinkedIn would find you would have a higher chance of getting accepted if you actually didn't have a message in there, which I thought was really interesting.
Oh, really?
Right? But for me, I may send you that message and then you won't accept me until 5 months later. So in LinkedIn, it will show that we just connected today. The message just got connected today, but I probably sent that 5 months ago. I don't remember. So there's got to be some kind of memory. There's a thread of, I sent this to you for X, Y, and Z 8 months ago, 5 months ago, whatever, right? And that's just the authentic component of how do I stay connected? If you know your why, that's usually the big piece. For me, my why is I'll talk to anyone because, once again, I don't know where a conversation is going to go. Understanding that time is valuable. Once again, life's about time, relationships. Time is valuable. I will get not interested, or you know what, I don't have the time to talk. Great. If you can tell me what your strategy is, then I will be able to connect you and save you all those emails that someone's probably sending you. Great. If we can get along, I use the would you grab a beer with me test. We don't have to be best friends. We don't have to work together, but would you grab a beer with me? Great. Let's connect and go from there. So if you're starting from scratch, have your strategy and understand why are you reaching out to these people. Your end goal could be I'm trying to sell, but that's transactional. Your end goal should really be how do I get into favor with this person so that they think about me and I think about them, and then always be of service. And that's the other side of it. Like, how do I be of service? So if I know my goal is to ultimately sell you in something, how do I serve you first and build that goodwill of going like, oh, I've helped Courtney, I've helped this person, as opposed to everything's very transactional. That's a mindset. And there's nothing wrong with the person that's got the transactional mindset. They're probably more successful than I am in some regards, but define success, we can look at that. But I look at how many relationships and therefore connections I've got as true success.
So this whole podcast is sort of an experiment for me, having made podcasts for years, decades. I am for the first time doing it, just kind of rolling my own DIY. I'm doing every aspect of it, right? So I'm trying to figure out how to use LinkedIn with podcasting because it's traditionally and still is a business forward platform. Whereas you think of podcasts, you think of maybe Instagram or YouTube. And I just wonder, where do you see the opportunity for podcasters and podcasts on LinkedIn?
It depends on what your focus is, right? So if I'm a journalistic show and I'm trying to promote and get new listeners to my show on LinkedIn, probably not the best place, right? Like, you're not going to convince a person or go, hey, I'm going to do a post about, let's go cereal. Go like, all right, is LinkedIn the best place for cereal to promote its podcast and try and grow users? Probably not if I was to think about their marketing plan. But for you, if you're like, all right, I'm trying to create new connections in podcasting, or if you're a scientist and you're trying to connect with more people in the science field or whatever avenue you're in, that's a business. That makes a lot of sense. So I think if I looked at each platform, know what your focus is, know where your audience is, and you're going to use it accordingly. For me, Instagram's not where I'm connecting with people. It's not the authentic side. I'm not creating content on Instagram that makes sense. But to promote my podcast, sure, I'm launching my podcast network Insights. So that makes sense for me. I think if we look at this and you understand just as well as I do, probably better, know where your audience is, know who you're trying to reach, and therefore choose the mediums that will make that for you.
Okay, yeah, knowing that like a lot of the people I serve are in the sort of thought leadership entrepreneur space, I do think that LinkedIn is the space for them. So I think it's a good place for us to stay because, and I'm also taking this advice for myself because I see all these creators out there and they're killing it on Instagram. And I'm like, but wait, maybe my audience isn't there. So I think the key thing you said is what are your objectives? Who are you trying to reach? Have you found in terms of like, I guess we could just compare notes on this. I last night was looking at LinkedIn and I'm trying to get inspired. You borrow ideas from other people on how they're doing things, right? And I saw, I think for the first time, or maybe I'm just noticing it now that I'm creating my own podcast, she had a page. Like in the same way I have a business page, RSS has a business page. She had a page just for her podcast on LinkedIn. Are you planning to do that?
Already did. That's one of the tips I tell everyone. There's so many different ways you can approach, but nothing's worse than I come to your page and it says you're a host of a podcast. And if you don't have that linked back to the actual podcast, there's nothing more that I can gather. You could have your whole description, but like the professionalism that I see of being able to say, I started this podcast, Here's the page. Here's more information that I could put on there. You can post on that page if you want it, which I will end up doing, right? I don't want all of Greg Wasserman's LinkedIn to be about my podcast. I want the podcast page to be there. Do I expect to convert those that are following me on the Greg Wasserman LinkedIn page to my podcast page? Maybe. It's totally up to them on what they want. But I think from a professionalism, I tell all my podcasters, if you're going to create a dedicated Facebook page, dedicated YouTube channel, Instagram page, have that LinkedIn one, especially if that's where your audience is, so that it shows the professionalism. And so, as you said, from your clientele, coaches, if they've got a podcast, why wouldn't they want that to be another component?
It's very smart. Okay, it sounds like can we like borrow some of your free? It seems like you have a whole checklist of best practices when it comes to starting your podcast. I can't follow all my own best practices. I will be interested to see if you are able to do all of the things that you tell other people to do, but like what are the absolute like you just said like obviously have a LinkedIn page, but I just realized this yesterday, a LinkedIn page for your podcast. What are the say you, Greg, were going to be invited onto somebody's podcast and you mentioned looking for their LinkedIn page for their podcast. What are other like must haves? And if it's not there, you're like, forget it. You obviously don't know what you're doing.
It's funny, right? Because I'm doing the same thing. You're ahead of me in terms of launching your own podcast, but we're both going from behind the mic into now, all right, do as I say, not as I do. So I've got to start doing what I'm telling
Yep.
people to do. Setting up the LinkedIn page was one of the things I did. My biggest thing is assets. I'm struggling on getting that done, and the images and graphics, making it good, but not good, and doesn't need to be perfect, but you can modify that. I think that's a nice thing. It's like I've changed my graphic. I've logged into the rss.com account for my podcast, and I just keep updating the graphic. I'm like, oh, how do I like it here? And it's like, the nice thing is you can change that as many times as you want and update it, and you're not locked in. And I think that's also what people have to remember is like, if I do my titles and descriptions and someone says, hey, good example today, podcaster introduced themselves into our community, and I reached out to them, said, you might want to fix your titles and descriptions because honestly, I have no clue what your show's about, who you are, and what you're talking about. Great. Takes 2 seconds, log into your account and do that. Other tips and tricks is using AI. And I think, good example, I've recorded 3 episodes, but I haven't actually released them. So I've run them through AI, and I'm just like, look, how do I be a better host? What questions should I have been able to ask? And because of that, I've now added new questions to the questions that I'll ask future guests. It's helping me reframe, the arc and the story that I want to tell on these different podcasts, so that my show is not just the same format and you get bored listening to the different podcast network operators telling me the same thing. So definitely use AI, not just for titles and descriptions and blogs, but as feedback. If you think about it, most of us talk into a void. So we don't really
Yeah.
get an understanding of, is anyone listening? You could see your download numbers and go like, oh, I've got 50 downloads, but who are those people? And we're always trying to get feedback. The value of using AI is you can ask the questions, going like, looking at this transcript, where could Courtney have asked better questions? Where could Courtney have paused and let Greg speak without interrupting? Like, you can use all of those components to refine your storytelling, your ability to communicate as a podcast host. Because I think podcasting, as I say, it's the greatest relationship engine, but it's also helping me and therefore anyone else become a better communicator. I'm
Yeah.
long-winded, if we can tell. I'll just keep talking,
Yeah.
right? So how do we give you, as Courtney, the clip so that you can clip what Greg just said and go like, wow, mic drop, and here you go. Those are some of the things
Yeah.
that I tell podcasters.
So, hey, if you're listening to this and thinking, I know a podcast would be good for my business, but I have no idea what I'm doing, it's your lucky day, because my Sounds Great Podcast Launch Accelerator is a small group program designed for entrepreneurs who want to build a podcast that works for them and their business without adding a ton more work to their lives. The cohorts who've completed the Podcast Launch Accelerator have the most flattering things to say about what what it helped them achieve. Like, I couldn't have done it without Courtney, etc. At the end, you'll have a clear concept, title, positioning, and you'll have an actual podcast out there in the world with a trailer that we'll build together. So if you've been thinking about going for it with a podcast and you don't want to go it alone, learn more about the Sounds Great Podcast Launch Accelerator at soundsgreatstrategy.com. Yeah, this whole notion, we could do a whole other episode of like Claude or name your chatbot as coach, but I think that's really brilliant. Feedback is a gift, and you often won't get constructive feedback from either your listeners or your guest. So being able to use these chatbots for good is a really good tip I haven't heard yet. So good there. Sticking with the topic of relationships, what about the relationship you're building with your listeners as a podcaster? What have you said to people who are in podcasting about going beyond their numbers to better connect and create loyalty and feedback with their listeners?
This is going to be do as I say, not as I do, right? Because I tell everyone it would be great if people listen to my podcast. I think the resource of it is going to be valuable. I think the niche I've taken on talking about podcast networks is unique. But if no one listens to it, great. If no one gives me feedback on it, great. I'm so focused on the 50 relationships I get to have by bringing those guests on. And from that, getting information that I'd never been able to have, partly because I'll talk to these operators all the time, but I don't dive into their business. And so now having these conversations with each one of the operators, I can now start understanding more about their business, which then allows me to go and have more thoughts about how podcasting's working, a different level of knowledge, once again, using AI and saying, right, based on these 5 conversations, what are the themes? What are the concepts? And that gives me more content that I'm either going to able to talk on stage, talk to other podcasters, and share that unique perspective. To answer your question in terms of like, what is the feedback loop? There's nothing worse than going, like and subscribe to my podcast. Reviews are really great. Think about our own behavior. How many of us go to Yelp and look for a restaurant or whatever service we want, but we don't actually write a review? So it's really funny because it's like, I'm not writing the review, but I care about these strangers that I don't even know who they are. And I'm going to take their recommendation, go like, oh, this has a 4.9 on Yelp. I don't know who these thousands of people are, but hey, if 1,000 people said it's good, I must be good. If so many people are using that, but not writing a review, same exact concept. How do I get people to write a review for me? You have to show me. You have to tell me. So it could be, I got this review, and you start reading. And at the start, like you and I are starting right now, we have no reviews. So the only thing I can go with is my mom says that my show has been great and she loves listening to me talk. So if you find that review or if you find that truthful, I would love for you to write me a review and either prove my mom wrong or add your own 2 cents. It really helps me just get the feedback, right? So like you're now coaching the person going like, oh, that's a terrible review. I'm going to leave my own. Or like, oh, that's so sweet. His mom wrote that. Like, I'll give him something because no one else has written anything, right? So you're leading the listener to take the action. But always remember, what is my call to action? Am I going for, I can't get my listener to do everything. I can't go sign up for my newsletter, follow me on LinkedIn, write me a review. Like they'll just be overwhelmed with 5 different actions. I got to figure out which one am I looking for? What do I care about at that moment to try and do? So think about what is your actual strategy and call to action. But the review piece, that's something I always tell people about.
That's really good. And it's a perfect example. I've had people say like, do I really need to tell people to follow me or whatever, sign up for this? And it's like, yes, actually, you cannot assume people know what to do. You need to lead the horses to the water and hope that they drink it. But you first have to lead them there. Going back to how you said you're fine if nobody listens to your podcast. And honestly, I've sort of had the same feeling because it becomes this artifact in and of itself that's evergreen. If ever I'm going to be leading a course or a cohort or a masterclass on how to use podcasts as a relationship engine, I'll be like, go listen to my episode with Greg. He talks about X, Y, and Z, right? So the content itself is valuable because I'm also not looking to get rich off this podcast. Thank God. Pressure's off. It's about the conversation itself. So Given all of that, and also knowing that you're using it as a way to have a conversation you wouldn't otherwise have, how does the approach to an interview with the relationship in mind change when it's less about, I'm going to try and grow my audience, and more about, I want this conversation to be as valuable as possible?
I mean, in that case, it's exactly that. How do I make this conversation? How do I have I'll take another example. You want to get a job. You're trying to change careers. Job market's terrible right now. Start a podcast. Whether you are trying to stay in the same career field or you're trying to switch careers based on where we are as a job market, the easiest way is like, all right, I could either call up Courtney and go, Courtney, I see you're a project manager at X company. I'm looking to get a job there. I would love to talk to you. Courtney's like, A, I have no pull on this. B, I don't have time for that. I got so much on my workload. So I'm sorry. That's nice that you would love. Send me something. That's probably going to be the response. Not because they have anything against you. A, they don't know you. And B, they have a lot on their plate. But you can go, I've got now a podcast about project management. Courtney, you're a project manager. I would love to bring you on my show and have a conversation. Now, that is ultimately creating knowledge that I can use, A, about your company and the questions I'm bringing, B, about your path, creating that connection. But it also now opens up you to better support me because I've now created a connection in the relationship on, oh, Courtney's now on this project management and we all want to be heard. We all want others to know, like, yeah, I'm an expert. Like, there's the gift side of it is I brought Courtney on to talk about this. Like, she may be going like, who am I? I'm just like this normal project manager at this company. But now the fact that someone wants me on this podcast to talk about this is huge. If someone says, how many downloads do you have? My answer is, you're probably not the right person for me because it takes a lot of work to grow the downloads and I'm just starting out. The other side is I was a guest on one guy's podcast early on in his podcasting career. The guy's now doing over 1 million downloads a month. So would I say no to someone when it's early on? Because right now, if I'm like, hey, I would love to be on your show, he's probably like, yeah, I've got the talent that's a little higher because I'm doing 1 million downloads. So I've now moved past you and having you on there. The nice thing is I got in early and that's evergreen content that will always be accessible. So as the millions keep growing, they'll find me in his database. So there's so many different ways to think about how do I create the connection? How do I leverage this relationship so that I'm able to not think about how do I just grow the show and get downloads. It's truly just the relationship.
How do you keep that relationship going? Again, knowing neither of us have done this full cycle yet, right? If the main goal of the podcast is to develop a deeper relationship with the person you're having on, what happens after you say, thanks for being on, you close down the session? What's next?
That's the biggest thing. Most of us do the record, edit, publish. Hey, Greg, your episode's live. And then we move on. And the ask for, hey, will you promote it? And that's about it. My whole thing is at least once a quarter, bring your guests together and do a Zoom call and go, look, you all were guests on my show. Once a quarter, I'm bringing you on and we're just going to have a half-hour conversation because most likely if you're a guest on my show, there's value of the other guest. If we go back to, I want to be the connector, it's a touch point. Am I going to get, if you do 13 guests a quarter, am I going to get all 13 to join me at Tuesday at 10 o'clock? Maybe not. They're like, oh, I can't do Tuesdays. It's busy. But as your quarters go on, your 13 turns into 26, turns into 39, turns into the 52. Maybe the first time you get 3 and you realize, you know what? There's not much for us to talk about with just the 3 of us. It was a great check-in. It was good to connect. Quarter 2, you now get 5 on there, maybe 2 new. So you just keep the exponential expansion of that, which
You know,
is huge.
I was going to say, but you're almost like creating a community out of your guests.
Yes.
I haven't even heard of that yet, and I love it, and I'm stealing it, and everyone should.
I mean, I'm on your show and you're like, Greg, May 2nd at 10 o'clock, I'm bringing all my guests together. And I join and there's 3 of us. I get a chance to chat with you, but then I also get to meet the other guests who, in your case, are podcasters that I should probably know. If it's a project management show, I don't know why I keep going with that, but I'll stay with that theme. And so now you're able to bring 13 project managers together. Problem most of us have, and this is where if you are the catalyst, when you are running your own podcast, your job is to be the catalyst, to create these connections, to serve back, but bring these people together. So at least once a quarter, I can go, I brought 13 project managers together who would probably never otherwise never talk to each other, who in their mind are probably going to say no to the meeting because in their mind they think I don't have time for this. Why do I need to talk to other project managers at other companies? Like whatever the story may be. But the truth be told, you have no clue where a conversation is going to take you. Maybe talking to the other project manager ends up getting you in 3 years from now the next job because you met this person through Gret. And my whole thing is how to be the catalyst for those conversations. How do I 3 years from now go, Courtney got this job because she met Joe on Greg's podcast network meeting. And now Greg's not even in the room, but 3 years later, Courtney's remembering him and thanking him. You have no clue where those conversations go. So being the catalyst for it is always going to be a big piece for me.
Okay, I have some rapid fires and then we'll close out. I want you to give a plug to your podcast that will probably be out by the time this airs. This is a question I get all the time. Episode length, longer, shorter? What's the ideal?
I mean, the math shows 38 to 45 minutes is the go-to. I'm not following that because once again, if my mindset is not how many metrics and how many downloads I can get, but if I can spend, good example, if we had a hard stop, great, you got as much time as you had, but I always ask like, hey, do we have a hard stop? If my guest is going to give me more time, I'm going to take that. And A, you can either cut it down, or B, once again, as what I said, I don't care. So I've talked to my producer about this. He's like, Greg, your first episode was a little long. We have to figure out how we trim this. I'm like, if my guest is going to give me that time and I get to have that one-on-one conversation, that connection with them, and it's not transactional of like, you got a half hour, ask me the questions, and then I'm gone. But like, we want to keep this rolling even after the conversation's over. I'm going to let it be. Now, you could look at your metrics and see where the drop off is or people stopping. Once again, I don't want to go down that mindset. You do have to keep in mind, and I've got podcasters here who have a 3.5 hour show and they're starting out. I'm like, would I rather watch a Marvel movie for 3.5 hours? Or would I want to listen to you three guys talk about this for 3 hours? I did the research. Like even Huberman Lab, his show started off with between 60 and 90 minutes. And then he did 2 hour shows twice in the first 2 years. It wasn't until after his second year that he started expanding. Why? Because he started understanding where's my audience, the engagement, what are they looking for? And they probably was being told, you know what? I'm going to go deeper in this. But it took him 2 years. So that's 100 episodes for him to get the research to understand how much longer can I make my episode. But he kept it short early on and then expanded from there. So I think that's another piece where while we say 38 to 45 minutes is a good starting point, get growth, understand when your audience is dropping off, and then you can expand or shorten it. There's also the side of like knowing who your audience is. I've talked to a friend of mine who ran a husband and wife's podcast. Husband's show, people would listen to him for 3 hours. The wife's show, they knew that the audience was female business on the go, and so they only have 20 to 35 minutes. And if they made it longer, great information, but the audience can't pay attention because they don't have the time. They're only doing for whatever they've got. So you understand your audience is also going to be, for me, as I said, it'd be great if I got thousands of downloads in the podcast industry, it would be incredible. And they find it as a resource and they give me all this feedback. But for me, it's more about the guest.
Which brings me to my next question. What is a metric that new podcasters can look at that's more important than the download?
The answer to this is going to be, what are you trying to accomplish? If your goal is, how do I grow this show to become a media company, then downloads, time spent, engagement is going to be your key piece. If you go with what I teach people, your show is about, it's the relationship engine that you're building. So therefore the metric is, how many relationships am I developing? How am I staying in contact with this relationship? How am I nurturing this relationship? And then the content that comes out of it, because a podcast becomes your ultimate flywheel. I can take different clips, I can repurpose this, I can turn it into poems. So like, what is the engagement, not just on the podcast from a download standpoint, but the overall audience? If I get a newsletter from this gentleman, Ryan Berman, every Thursday. I don't listen to his podcast, but I can't wait for his newsletter on Thursdays. Does an amazing job. I then either use that as a screenshot and that becomes content for me because he just wrote it so well, or I'll pass it on to someone going like, hey, this was great inspiration. This was great, thought provoking. I think you'd find it valuable. You know what's at the bottom? The next episode of his podcast. And then below that, his sales pitch of like what his services are. But he's not focused on selling you. It's about how do I provide value? How do I get you to think? And that creates an emotional connection, which then creates the I want to share this, I want to do. So that is building a audience that I will not listen to his podcast. I do, but like barely. He gets 3 minutes of my time. So from a metric standpoint, where's your audience? Are you growing your audience, not just on downloads? You're growing it everywhere. And that's why I say, if you're trying to be a media company, then your media company, you're focused on downloads. You can sell sponsorships. You're focused on your Instagram, so you can sell sponsorships there and sell that. But the reality is, I don't want to focus on that. My background's in media sales. I don't want to have to try and think about selling that. I just want the relationships. I want the connections. And the real ROI is going to be, what am I selling? In this case, myself. Or in your case, maybe you want more clients. You're like, all right, if I bring these guests on my show, and these guests now get to know me and they introduce me to other people, then I don't care if anyone's listening. It is, after 50 episodes, did I make the ROI by getting 4 projects and each project pays me 30 grand? Well, there's $120,000 salary that I got, as opposed to I had to get 5,000 downloads just so I can make a couple $100 in sponsorships.
Yep. Well said. And honestly, this may be the first podcast, I think you said this, where the flywheel, you can create poetry out of it. Just you wait, Greg. I am going to find a way to create a poem out of the transcript. Stay tuned for that. Okay,
No, I mean,
so much more to
I know
say.
2 podcasters that do that. One's written a book. When I was
Wow.
at Cast Magic, that was one of the funny things, is like getting creative. How do you turn this into? My mentor took the transcript and went through some random song from the 60s. And it was like, using this transcript, write the lyrics in the tune for this. And we all just had a good laugh about it. But yeah, there's so many different ways you can think about how do I package the learnings, the content from this into something, whether it's a book, whether it's a poem book, you name it. There's so many different pieces of content that comes out of great conversations.
Okay, my last question before we wrap up is talking about longevity in podcasting. And one goal of mine with this podcast is to teach people how to make a podcast that doesn't die out after episode 3. So, what would you say is the minimum amount someone should give before calling it a day?
Be truthful on what you're trying to accomplish, right? I mean, if we think about the most shows that you've probably produced and been involved with, they're in a sense media, right? Like, they're big brand names. Think what Meghan Markle was one. So she's a big celebrity who's brokered this deal with Spotify, and Spotify's like, all right, I'm going to sell the advertising in this. So I need this show to be, and it wasn't about Megan. Megan's making her money as a contract, but also Spotify's making their money on the advertising side. Completely different business model from what you're doing. It's like, I'm not trying to make money by selling sponsorship. So be honest with what you're trying to accomplish. Know that podcasters, there's 400,000 active podcasts. There's millions of podcasts that have been out there. The joy is, it's grit. It is perseverance. It is staying true, because it took, I'll use Joe Rogan as the example, right? He was an 80s comic who's grinding in New York, and everyone's looking at Joe Rogan, how he's the top podcaster. He was grinding for 40 years to get where he's at. So if you're truthful, and I think every podcast network I've talked to so far, they've all given me the same advice, is it's grit, it's grinding, it's keep going. So if you aren't finding the success of downloads, if you're not finding the success of getting your audience to meet you where you want them to be, stay with it. I use the example, I live in an apartment complex with about 200 people. My best friend could be in here. My future wife, no offense, girlfriend, but like, I could have like a future wife in here, right? But unless I'm knocking on every door and getting to meet every person, I would never know that. And that's most of the times what we end up doing from a podcast. Like, oh, I'm sending it out there, I'm marketing it. Why is no one picking this up? It takes some grind, it takes some grit, it takes some actual luck. I had a podcaster hit me up this week and he's like, I all of a sudden had a spike, but I don't know what I did different. And like, sometimes it just takes that moment where one person happened to have listened to it and shared it, and that got picked up by a blog. You have no clue where your next listen could be, where the next opportunity could be. If you stop because you're frustrated, because you're not getting the downloads, you're not getting the feedback. And that's also why I coach people of like, I don't care about the metrics. I want the relationships. If you know what your reason for doing this, if the relationships is the core reason, you don't have to worry about downloads. You don't have to worry about metrics. You just have to worry about good conversations. And the biggest reason, as you said, 3 episodes. I think Pod Fade's like 8. We stop because we don't have a reason. We don't have a strategy. The most reason podcasters stop is they don't have an actual understanding of why I'm doing this. I want to bring people on my show, and I think I'm a good conversationalist. I want to tell stories. Great. So if you just want to tell stories, why? Are you transitioning those stories into a speaking gig to talk about whatever the topic you're doing? Are you transitioning those stories into you want to be a media company? You want to grow this, you can get paid for sponsorship. Understand the truth of what you're doing. Too many are starting a podcast with the dollar sign, I'm going to be a media company, not realizing the grind of it, the opportunities of it, and the fact that you never stop because the hustle still always has to come from you. Even if you do join a network or hit it big, everyone's always going to be like, what's next? Where does this go from here?
Okay, so networks have come up a couple times, so we'll close out with this because I want to hear about your podcast. For those who are brand new to this, what is a podcast network and why is it worthy of a whole podcast about it?
I mean, look, your podcast is about how do I teach podcasters about podcasting? And there's a lot of podcasts out
I
there. The
know.
unique the unique side is that's why what each host has is unique to their experience, to their message, to the connection that people have with Courtney versus someone else who has a podcast about podcasting. I just came to realize every podcaster is trying to figure out how do we make money, how do we grow, and they end up joining a podcast network, not understanding, is this the right network for me? Is this the right terms? What am I actually agreeing to? How are they going to help me? And so the point of the podcast network insights is how do I help understand more about these conversations I'm already having with network providers, but also help podcasters going like, if everyone wants to be part of iHeart because they're the largest in what they do, is that the right move for you? You know, I had a conversation with an Australian radio company, and I'm bringing her on to go like, how do we understand what your business model is? Because everyone's business model is different. Every network operates differently. And I think our job working in the industry is to bring that lens to the minds of not only other networks, in my case, but also the podcasters of not how do you just start, but what questions, what are the red flags you should be thinking about if you were to join a network? Why stay independent? What are you giving up? What is the right move for you? And that's why Podcast Network Insights is the show I decided to launch.
One last thing though, for people who are brand new to podcasting, they might not even know what a podcast network is, and maybe it's not open to them. I think a lot of them have a threshold that you need to be at to join a network, but can you give an example of the range of options of podcast networks?
I just found out an interesting stat talking to someone yesterday that he's got like 400 networks in his portfolio. And I'm like, I only have 100. So I clearly know that there's more out there. But podcast network, that's kind of the point of the show is what is a network and what is a podcast? But if you're listening to this, it's going to be the simplest way to put it is an aggregation of content that either fuels you to help grow, help monetize, give you community that you can be part of. So you're not alone in this mission, but once again, everything is going to be still on you. The growth is still the content, the show, but there's shows out there, or sorry, there's networks out there that strictly how do they help you monetize? Back to my career of they've got an ad sales team. It's like, great, we're going to go sell this. We're going to take a percentage of what we sell and we'll be able to put it on your show. And you have to negotiate, creative freedom. Do I like these advertisers? And then you've got collectives. In some regards, I look at them as collectives, even if they're networks, or it's a niche. I look at like the Jason Falls with the Marketing Podcast Network. So a bunch of shows, let's call it 100 podcast shows around marketing. And he's like, great, we're going to aggregate this. And we do promo swaps. We help each other. We learn from each other. Each of the businesses that are on his network are focused on their own consulting, focused on their own B2B, whatever its focus is. But at least you now can come together in this collective of we all do the same thing. And if we look back at our earlier part of this conversation on the guessing side, if you had a place where you can turn to and go, now am I going to listen to Courtney and how I should podcast, but then I'm going to be part of a network that's going to teach me on all the other skills that I may be missing. Back to the project management. If I had a project management podcast network and I got all these project managers, that's a great way for them to learn. And that's what also I love about podcasting is we all go on each other's shows, not because I'm afraid that you're going to steal my listeners and I'm going to lose downloads because they now like Courtney over me. No, that's truly what makes podcasting amazing is we have this collaborative function that allows us to connect and a network, depending on what network you look at, is there to help you with that.
Awesome. Thank you, Greg. Now, where should we send people to find more of your wisdom about life and relationships and time?
So this is back to your earlier question about do as you say, not as you do. What are the tips? I don't have a website. I live on LinkedIn. I'm using LinkedIn as my borrowed landscape of where I drive people. So find me on LinkedIn, connect, send me a connection request with, hey, I heard you on Courtney's podcast. I'll send her a screenshot because that is the greatest compliment, right? Like we don't get the
Yes.
feedback. So if you reach out to me on LinkedIn saying, I loved what you had to say, I want to learn more, I would love to get your insights on X, Y, and Z, or I'd love to just be in your network because I do X, Y, and Z on the side, and that's my day job. And who in your network would you be able to connect me with and just get into Greg's background here? That would be great. So find me there. My podcast, if you're interested in learning about podcast networks, it's hosted on rss.com, and that's called Podcast Network Insights.
Thank you, Greg. I appreciate your time. If this episode shifted how you're thinking about the value your podcast can bring you, even just a little, and what my favorite acronym ROI of podcasting might look like, then what I want you to do is make it real. Here are the 2 next steps I want you to take, even if you're not even really started yet. It'll help you realize the why of your podcast that might motivate you to take action on the how and the when and the where. So what you need to do, and I have a worksheet for this, but more on that in a bit, you need to write down return on investment in my podcast looks like X. For me, as I've said before, was knowing that it had resonated and connected with someone and provided them with either the feeling of being seen and understood or a sort of path towards a solution of a struggle they were facing in either stepping up to the mic or continuing to record podcast episodes. So for me, I said, ROI is going to be hearing from someone that my podcast landed with them. And so in my first few episodes, and still often I do, I give people my email. I say, hey, if this landed with you, if you found something of value here, or if you want to argue with me about something, no one's taken me up on that yet, here's my email. And here it is, Courtney@soundsgreatstrategy.com. Let me know. And they did. And that gave me so much motivation to continue. So for you, if yours is, I want someone to book a discovery call because of something they heard on my podcast, or I want to be invited on somebody else's podcast, you write that down. And then when you sit down to record, exactly in where I am right now, in your outro, I want you to ask for that. I want you to call that action into existence. I want you to say, hey, if this episode meant something to you, could you go to my website, soundsgreatstrategy.com, and click on that link that says book an intro call? Or if it's, I want to be invited onto a podcast, you say, hey, if you enjoyed hearing me on this side of the mic and you want to have me on your show, I love nothing more than podcast guesting. Because the fact is, once somebody has gotten to the end of your episode and they're developing this relationship with you, if you ask them for something, you've just given them a lot of your time and your wisdom. Chances very good that they will give you the action that you are calling them to. So these are just a taste of the kind of things that we build together in my podcast launch accelerator. It's a small, high-touch group experience where we take you from idea to actually having a live podcast out there in the world. And we do it together. I'm co-creating with you. You have a group of similarly motivated people who've got your back and will support you and come up with partnership ideas together. So if that sounds cool to you, please soon go to my website, soundsgreatstrategy.com, and you'll find a link there to apply to be part of the accelerator. Do it quick. There's a limited number of seats. file that application. If you want to work with me, that's a really great way in, and I would love to have you. Until next time, this is Talking the Talk with me, Courtney Reimer. Thanks for listening. Thanks for creating. Please keep doing both.